webinar so folks can access it later, and we'll let you know where you'll be able to access and all that stuff. Just want to say hi again. It's Teresa from Advanced Illinois. We really appreciate everyone hopping on. I think most folks are familiar with Advanced Illinois if you're on this webinar. But we are an independent advocacy and policy organization, really with a mission to prepare all students in Illinois for college, career, and civic life. And we are thrilled to be sharing with you one of our latest tools for assessing whether or not the new school funding formula is working to drive dollars to the neediest kids and the neediest communities in our state. And so we're going to get started. I'm going to ask if Anna or someone can just hit us back in the chat box to make sure that everyone can hear. Let us know, because we are using a different technology than our past webinars. So anyone can just type in and tell us that they can hear us. Maybe we can ask the chat box, can you hear us? We need you to type it, because unlike previous webinars where we've had problems with background noise, everyone is on mute. And so the only way to communicate with us right now is either to put it in the chat box or to text us personally directly. All right, can you just ask folks to hold on while we get through? Anna can't hear us, so no one can hear us. All right, can we call in?
See if you do phone call.
Hi everyone, it's Teresa Ramos from Advanced Illinois. Sorry for the delay. We are testing out a new webinar technology that allows us to mute folks with more discretion than before. So thanks for calling in and hanging in there. We're super excited that there's 56 of you who have joined us today, and we know some more will join. But we'll just start with some quick introduction. Hopefully you know who Advanced Illinois is if you're calling in. We are a statewide independent policy and advocacy organization that with the goal of really trying to help all kids in Illinois public schools achieve success in college, career, and in civic life. And we're thrilled to have so many of you on the line today to talk about our new tool, the Equity Dashboard. That is really our way of measuring and monitoring how well the new school funding formula is doing at driving dollars to the neediest students in the state. And so for those of you who are on, thank you so much for your advocacy with us over the last 5 years to get the incredible win that we got last year. And thanks for joining us now as we we take some more steps to monitor the state's progress. We are going to do a quick highlight just to recap, some kind of key terms and where we've been on school funding, and then we're going to dive into the equity dashboard as a tool. Unlike some of our past webinars, we will ask that you, if you have questions or comments and things that you want to raise, just type them right into the chat box, and we will, Melissa's going to kind of be monitoring, and Angelica will be monitoring the chat box, and we will keep track of the questions, and we will try to address them as they come up. And if we don't get to all of them, then we'll follow up with you afterwards. So just know that that's a place to ask questions. And we also encourage you to follow along right now on the dashboard. If you go to our website at advancedillinois.org, click on the data desk, and you will see the link to the equity dashboard right there. And so you can follow along and play along with us as we go. So we'll just go maybe to the next slide real quick. Just as I said, we'll do a high-level overview. So you all know we did it last year. We were able to change a really old formula that wasn't driving dollars to the neediest school districts and the neediest students in the state into a formula that has a clear path to equity and adequacy. We can now answer the question in Illinois: what should we be spending on students in Chicago, or students in Pana, or students in East Moline, which is a huge accomplishment, and Advanced Illinois is proud of having backbone the work, and grateful to all of you who are on the line who supported us through that process over the last 5 years. And we are looking forward to kind of continuing to monitor and understand how the formula works and how it's driving dollars across the state. One of the key terms that we wanted to just gloss for you is, and explain in the context of the formula, is adequacy. So we know when we talk about the old formula, we weren't driving dollars to the neediest students. We don't want equal funding. We don't want to give the same dollars to all students. What we want is to get dollars to schools and students and districts that have the greatest need, depending on their need. And that's what the new formula sets up around equity. On adequacy, we just wanted to do a quick repeat, since we use this terminology as a way to understand the dashboard, what we mean by adequacy and how it's calculated in the formula at a high level. We're not going to do a deep dive. If you're interested in doing another deep dive on how the formula works and the ins and outs, just let us know and indicate that in the chat box, and we can do a follow-up webinar on that. But we'll go to the next slide that just walks us through a high-level calculation of adequacy, and you can just throw everything up there. Great. So hopefully you all have seen, I think there's just a little bit more. Hopefully you all have seen this this slide before. We used it many times last year, but to talk about how the formula calculates adequacy. So the first step in the evidence-based funding model is to look at these, what the State Board is now calling these 34 costs or factors that contribute to a strong public education in Illinois, things that we know really improve outcomes for kids. So you see how there's just a few of them represented here, but there are 34 cost factors. We take those factors in the formula and we apply them to individual district data. We apply them to enrollment. We look at how many English learners there are, how many special needs students, and the low income demographics of the district. And then we adjust based on regional wage differences to get this unique district adequacy target that you'll see featured in different parts of the dashboard. And so we just wanted to start there with, this is how we get to adequacy. This is how adequacy is defined in the formula. So that way when we go through like the gap to adequacy, folks know exactly what went into the calculation, how it was calculated at a high level. And again, if you want more specifics on the pieces, just let us know in the chat box. All right. The last thing I'll just say is we'll take you through this formula. You know that this is just a starting point. Last year, a huge victory, but a starting point in beginning to fill the gap between for districts to get to adequacy, and that this year the Funding Illinois Future Coalition and the Fix It Now Fund It campaign is asking for an additional $400 million investment into the formula for this year. So we know last year school districts got an additional $350 million, that becomes part of the money that they should expect every year. This year, we're asking for $400 million on top of that to level set school districts and keep us on a path to equity and adequacy. And so at the very end, we'll come back to you and talk about the steps that you can take to help us get the General Assembly and policy leaders to push for an additional investment into the new formula. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Baptiste, who is going to walk you through the architecture of the equity dashboard.
Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So we are currently on Advanced Illinois' equity dashboard page. If you are coming here for the first time, you go to the data desk section of our page. You then click on equity dashboard, and that will take you here to this page and this data visualization. So this first page that we're going to be looking at is our state landscape page. So this page is going to be giving us a few bits of information. So what we've actually done, and it's just loading right now, is we've taken every school district in the state and we've set them based on how well they're funded. We've just placed them by rank on how well they're funded. Now, the way we've calculated that is taking their adequacy target, which is what Teresa just talked about, and taking their current state and local resources, their current funding. And what we did is you divide those two things. You divide how much funding they have by what their adequacy target is to come up with a percent of adequacy. So how well funded are these school districts? And then we've plotted them all throughout this map. So every district is represented here. And then what you're seeing is the districts that are in the red and yellow are underfunded. So they have less than 100% of the funding they need. The districts that are in the blue are those districts that have more funding than they would need based on their adequacy target. And so right off the bat, what you'll notice is that the vast majority of school districts are currently underfunded. We have 706 school districts representing 1.7 million students that are currently underfunded under the current formula. Of those school districts, over half of them are actually under 70% of the funding that they need. So they don't have as much funding as they need. So they have less than 70% of the funding they need. And that actually represents 1.2 million students. So 2/3 of the students that are underfunded right now don't have the funding that they need because of the lack of state and local resources that they have. For all of the school districts that are currently underfunded to reach that 100% mark, to reach 100% of the funding they need, we would need $6.8 billion added to the system. And in the next few slides, we're going to get into what the formula is doing to kind of get us closer to a place of adequacy for all of the districts in the state. Now, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about this very first page on the equity dashboard? If you do, feel free to type them into the chat box, and then I'll just pause and see if there are any questions so I can respond.
Oh, and I think people are typing things into the question box. Is that right? So you can use the question box too, and we'll monitor both the chat and the question box since there are two there.
Okay, great. So if there are no questions, we're going to move on to the second page. Okay, great. So we are getting a few questions. How do you quickly find a district? So we are going to be talking about looking up your district specifically on the district lookup page. Something that we might be adding to this page is a search box, so you can kind of highlight your district right away. That's not currently a feature, but it is something that we're looking into adding. Great. So now we're going to move on to the next page, which is our district comparison page. Now there's a lot of components on this page, and so I'm just going to take them section by section. So first we're going to talk about this map to the left, on the left side. And this map shows us all of the districts with their percents of adequacy that we talked about on the previous page. It's the same color scheme as we had on the previous page as well. What you'll notice right off the bat is that districts all over the state are underfunded, and districts all over the state are severely underfunded. So there isn't a region in the state that doesn't have a district that's less than 60% funded. So this is a problem that is statewide and not necessarily isolated in any one district. What we've then done is taken all of these districts throughout the entire state and put them into this tree map right here, which is this kind of boxier chart to the right. This box, this larger kind of box chart, gives for every single district a box that represents that district. So here we have J.S. Morton District, we have Harvard District here, we have Chester District, and so every district has a box. The color of the box again represents the percent of adequacy for that district, and then the size of the box actually represents how much new funding that district is getting per pupil. So this chart is able to help us see whether or not this formula is working. So if this formula is working, we would hope that the districts that are the most underfunded, the furthest away from their adequacy targets, are the ones getting the most new dollars. Then what we're seeing is the districts that are under 60% of adequacy are actually the districts getting the most funding, and they're actually getting the biggest piece of the new funding pie. So, for example, J.S. Morton receives $1,000 new dollars per pupil because it was at 47% of the funding that it actually needed. So it was one of the furthest away districts from adequacy. Something to note here is that under the new formula, all of the districts that were under 50% of the funding that they needed are now over 50%. So it is making a difference. We also have 25 districts that have had percentage point gains of 5% or more. So I've moved from being, for example, 45% funding to 50% funding or 51% funding. So we are moving the needle in the right direction. So that's really what this second chart is showing us. Now, before I get into the next, these gemstone charts at the bottom, I just want to pause for a question on those first two charts.
And we did have one kind of general higher level question from Ira. Thank you for your question. So it's just, what has been the response from districts to this data? Is it disputed in any way, and do they kind of agree with the numbers? And I think I'll let anyone jump in, but the process of kind of creating this model has been a lengthy process of verifying with districts that their numbers are correct and then coming up with the actual full model.
Yeah, I don't know that we've heard anybody disputing the data just yet. I think what's happening is folks just want to believe that we're going to continue to fill this model with funding. The other thing just to note on that front is that ISB did just announce a professional review committee that will be any kind of questions about how the formula is working in practice, or questions about whether or not the right 34 elements are calculated in the right way. Those are all the types of things that this professional review committee will be digging into to see if the formula needs to be adapted or changed over time. And it is one of the reasons why we put together this equity dashboard, is so that way every year we can monitor the progress of the formula and ensure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I believe that first professional review committee meeting is in June, right? Just this June. So there are checks on the formula established.
Great. So now I'm going to move into these gemstones at the bottom, these new circle graphs, and talk a little bit about some student demographics for districts. So what these are showing us, for every district, we have it has its own unique circle. So this is Zion here represented right here. When you have a circle, the size of the circle represents how much new funding you're getting, and the color of the circle is going to be the student characteristic that's listed. So in this case, we have property wealth per pupil. If you are under the state average for property wealth, then you're going to be in the yellow. If you're above the state average for property wealth, which is around $6,000 per pupil, then you're going to be in the purple. And so this, right off the bat, this first property wealth is showing us that actually the districts that are getting new dollars all have below average property wealth. They're all really in the yellow that we can see. If they're in the purple, that they're very, very small, so you can't actually see those districts. And what that actually tells us is something that we could do a little bit of a deeper dive on. So what we found when we looked at property wealth is 100% of districts with below average property wealth for the state are currently underfunded. 56% of those with above average property wealth are underfunded. So property wealth has a huge impact. Your zip code has a huge impact on how well you're going to be funded. And this gemstone really just captures that. As we go into some of these other gemstones, it actually is going to be very useful to look at some of these filters on the right to look at some of the things that are emerging. So as we look at low income, for example, right now we have a picture of the state with all of the districts with less than 50% low income students are going to be in the blue, and all of those with above 50% low income students are going to be orange all the way to kind of a darker red. As soon as we switch this percent of adequacy to 1, so we're looking at districts with above average adequacy, the districts really shift in their demographics. So now, you know, the vast majority of districts that are well funded have less than 50% low income students. We only have a few of those that are well funded that have a lot of low income students. So it really gives you kind of another picture. We also see, as we look at students of color, something similar. So 95% of districts that are, and I'm going to just shift this to a different filter, which is the students of color filter up here. Shift this to 50%. So this shows you all of the districts for students of color in the state. And so what you're going to see right off the bat from both the state map and from this chart at the right is that a lot of districts who have more students of color are underfunded. In fact, 95% of districts that are minority students of color are underfunded compared to 77% of districts that are majority white. So if you have more students of color in your district, you're much more likely to be underfunded. We also see that for these districts, they have kind of larger circles, so they are going to, and on this chart, they have kind of bigger boxes. They tend to be more in the 60% of adequacy and under 70%, so they are getting more new dollars. If we shift this filter to low income districts, so if I make this 50% low income, what you'll notice here is these gemstones are also changing. So low income districts, more so than all districts together, tend to have more students of color, tend to have more English learners, and have less property wealth. And then 98% of the districts that are majority low income students are underfunded. And so we do see a kind of difference in funding for those districts as well. So this is just a few different ways to kind of cut at the data and explore the demographics of different kinds of school districts. But these filters at the right really also allow you to play with the data yourself and draw some of your own conclusions. Are there any questions on this page, playing with filters, looking at these gemstones, or working with the whole page together?
And as those questions about the data viz on this page roll in, we have a couple more high-level questions. And I also just want to point out to Lisa's earlier question about finding a district. Alex probably mentioned this already, but it's right up here. You can search for any specific district, and the entire data visualization will kind of reorganize itself to show you all of these insights about that specific district. So our high-level questions are, does the adequacy funding include Title I funds? What's the right way to think about those funds according to the evidence-based model?
Say it one more time, sorry.
So this is from Wendy. Thanks, Wendy. Does the adequacy funding include Title I funds? What's the right way to think about those funds according to the evidence-based model?
So the adequacy calculation does not include federal funds. Under federal law, federal funds are intended to supplement, not supplant, existing local funds. So that's why it's not included in the calculation. Title I funds can be used for a variety of services, some of them that are not actually included in the overall definition of adequacy, and that includes things like wraparound services and preschool education as well. So, if a district is not yet at adequacy, obviously using Title I funds to supplement how it gets, how the actual evidence-based element is useful. And if it is at adequacy, then starting to use those funds for other supplemental services is probably valuable.
Thanks, Ben. Our next question is from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. Her question is, what races and ethnicities are included under students of color? I noticed you have separate filters for Black and Latino students.
Thank you for your question, Michelle. So students of color includes all non-white students, so it also includes students of Native American descent, Asian students, whereas the Black and Latino filter has obviously Black and Latino students. So it was just another way to cut at the data in a more specific way if folks are interested in specifically Black and Latino students.
Awesome. And thanks to Laura for our last question. She asks, from a policy and funding lens, is the goal to have all districts get to at least 100% adequately funded, or is there another target?
Yeah, I think the goal is to get districts to, over the long term, to get to an equal levels of their adequacy target, so that all districts would be, that we would see over time all districts are hitting 70% of adequacy for what they need. All districts eventually get to 100% of their adequacy target. It's not necessarily to say districts that are spending above shouldn't be spending above, right? But it's wanting to get the resources to the districts that have the most needs, that we're giving them equitable opportunities there. So getting a similar adequacy targets. The only thing that I'll say, right, again, is to the last question, this is about state and local dollars. Federal dollars aren't here, as Ben said. Philanthropic dollars aren't here. So this isn't a total picture of spending necessarily for all schools and all districts. This is really just understanding these two kind of buckets of funding that go into the formula: state tax dollars and local tax dollars. Anything else?
All right, and we have one more. Thanks, Ira. So it's a question about the boxes. Does the new funding for pupil in the pop-up refer to new funding already in the pipeline? Or, I guess she means, or is it new funding this year? So what dollars are we looking at in those boxes?
So last year, and again, thanks to everyone who advocated, we got a 1947, this new funding formula, and we also got an additional $350 million into the budget. And these boxes are a reflection of how that 350, well, it's like 366 point something million is being dispersed. And that money, for a lot of reasons, didn't go out to districts until this April. I think some of it's still flowing. So that was just the money out of the budget from last year. We are actively advocating in Springfield for additional dollars to go in this year that we would hope would start to flow, this summer as we just as the system starts to work around this new formula. So thanks for the question.
Great. So thank you all for those questions. We're going to move on to the next page, which is the student demographics page. Okay, so this student demographics page will first put a few different components on here. It puts demographics that are along race, income lines, English learners as well, and then we have the Illinois state average. So this just has a kind of estimate of where students are in terms of their adequacy percent, so how well funded they are. And then at the bottom here we have how much new funding are they getting per pupil, and how is that being distributed to the state from these new dollars that were provided under the formula. So right off the bat, what you'll notice is that Black and Latino students, as well as low-income students, are all under 70% of and English learners are all under 70% of the funding they need, whereas higher income students, white students, and Asian students are all doing better under the current system. Now, these are percents of adequacy before the new dollars were added into the system. So this is where we were before that new money was added. The dollars under are going to represent how much new funding they got. So the percent of adequacy helped the formula distribute those new dollars, so that's why we're kind of placing them. So what we would hope is that those school districts and those student groups specifically furthest away from their adequacy target, so those under 70%, are getting the most new dollars. And what we're seeing here is that is the case, that Black Latino students, low-income students, and English learners are all getting the most new dollars out of this new funding. Great. So we are going to then look at another way to cut this data by comparing district demographics. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch this to race. What this does is it splits up all of the different student groups by whether or not those students are in majority student of color districts or majority white districts. So if they have, 50% or more students of color or less than 50% students of color. So what you'll notice right off the bat is across every single group, if you're in a district with more students of color, so if you're a Black student in a district with more students of color, you are less funded than a Black student in a district with more white students. Same thing for Latinos. 64% funding if you're in a district that's majority students of color, but you have 84% of the funding you need if you're in a district that's majority white. So what this really shows us is for every single, demographic and student group, you are getting more funding if you're in a district with more white students than funding if you're in a district with more Black students, or more, students of color in general. We're also seeing that for, students who are low income or higher income, same thing applies. If you're in a district with more students of color, you have less of the funding you need. As we look at how the new dollars are being distributed, what you're going to see across the board as we compare again is that the students and the student groups in the district with more students of color are going to be getting more dollars than the student groups in districts with more white students. And that is a result of the adequacy percents and how far away they are from the funding they need that we just talked about. Are there any questions about this? Okay, so then we can also cut the data by income of students. So this is going to be of school districts. So right now on the left, we have what are the percents of adequacy for districts that are majority low income, so have more than 50% low income students. And then on the right, you'll see what are the percents of adequacy for students in school districts that have fewer low income students, so less than 50%. Again, we're seeing a pretty sharp divide. So for all of these student demographics, whether it's race or income or English learners, if you're in a district with more low-income students, you are way less likely to be adequately funded. All of these student groups are under 70%, and actually the difference in how well funded you are for low-income and higher-income students really almost disappears once you're in a district with more low-income students. And then as we look at the bottom, in terms of the new funding districts are getting, if you're in a school district with more low-income students, across these student groups, you are going to be getting more funding than a school district or students in these student groups in a district with fewer low-income students. And that again reflects percents of adequacy and how far away those students in majority low-income school districts are from their adequacy targets.
Let me just add, this is showing what's happening at a state level. I'm sure folks who not at a district level, we're not looking into districts to compare how well students of color in a district or low-income students are funded within a district, but this is just one of the areas where we're just looking at the overall state landscape, and there's not a specific district comparison that we can do here. That type of stuff might come over the years, as we know that the new Every Student Succeeds Act requires us to report on spending at the school level within a district, but this is just the state landscape.
Great. And so the last way you can cut this data is around property wealth. And what you will see here is across all these student groups, there's actually the starkest contrast based on property wealth in how well funded you are. So across the board, so if you look at Black students, if they're in a district with below average property wealth, they're at 62% of the funding they need. If they're in a district with above average property wealth, they're at 91% of the funding they need. So across the board, zip code and property wealth in Illinois still plays a major, major role in how well funded you are. And because of that, we see that reflected in how much new dollars these different student groups are getting based on which districts they're in. So the districts with below average property wealth across the board and those student groups within those districts are going to be getting the most new dollars and much more new dollars than their peers in districts with above average property wealth. Okay, that was a lot to digest, so I'm just going to pause and see if there are any questions on this whole page before we move on to the last page.
Want to say anything about our website malfunctioning? I'm getting emails.
So just a quick note, hopefully everyone was able to follow Alex's path to the website. If you go to advancedillinois.org and then click on the data desk, we are aware that there's something happening with a similar website. So if you don't go to the our exact website and then go to data desk, you might be being redirected someplace else. If that happens, just close your browser. But in the interim, you just go to advancedillinois.org. When you get there, go to the data desk, and then you'll see the link to this equity dashboard.
Thanks, Teresa. It looks like we don't have any more questions on this page right now, but feel free as they come to you to drop them in the question box, and we can always come back to them after the next section.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to look at the district lookup page. So what this page allows you to do is compare your district, look up your district, and compare its student demographics and local resources to the state average. It also has a section about the funding that it's currently getting, the new funding it is having with this that it received, and then the remaining gap to adequate funding. So we are going to just demo this for you. The first district we're going to look up is Rockford. Okay, so what you'll notice right off the bat is if you look at Rockford, it has more students of color than the state. It's at 69%, the state's at 51%. It also has more low-income students and more English learners than the state average. Because of those low-income students and English learners, we would assume that it would have a higher, more need than the state average. If we then look at the local resources compared to the state, Rockford is taxing itself at 6.7%, which is significantly higher than the average for its district type, which is a unit district. So in Illinois, the unit school districts on average are at 4.3% for their property tax rate. Despite the fact that Rockford is overtaxing itself or taxing itself a lot more than the state average, it's actually bringing in fewer local resources per pupil than the state average. So part of that is just that it has fewer local resources to pull from. So even though it's putting more burden on its local community, it's not able to provide as much funding locally or pull as much funding locally for its students. That again shows us that Rockford would have a higher need than the state average along local resource lines, so that the state needs to compensate for that inability to raise more funds locally. And so what we see here at the bottom then is the district, so Rockford's current funding. So right now it's funding itself at, $8,767 per pupil. This shows us that that is underfunded, and it's actually at 61% of the funding it needs to adequately serve its students. To serve its students, it would need $13,351 per pupil. So right now we know it's a little under $9,000. It's getting $315 new dollars with the current formula, and it still has a little bit over $4,000 to go per pupil. So this kind of just gives you a nice examination as to how the district's doing and how this new funding is affecting the district and pushing it closer to adequacy.
I'm just going to say one thing, and then we know this is the 61% is based on the formula, not the new funding that they received. We know now with the $350 million that they just got, they would be at a higher percent of funding. But this type of thing happening with high property tax, like having higher than average property tax rates, is something that we knew was happening to districts that had a gap to adequacy, weren't able to provide their students with the services that they need, and weren't able to rely on the state in the way that they had in the past. And so this is a byproduct of the system that we created under proration and underfunding. And so I'll turn it over to Melissa to just walk through a few of those things.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly say Rockford is a perfect example of why, as Teresa said, knowing that there's this gap with districts that are doing so much, working so hard locally to raise funding and still falling short because they have low property wealth, the legislation actually included a provision for a property tax relief fund. And just as the new formula was designed to distribute new state dollars equitably to schools, the tax relief fund was designed to provide tax relief dollars in an equitable fashion. So it does that by targeting districts that have high property tax rates but low property wealth, like Rockford, as you can see here. And you can kind of explore other districts to see who else that is going to fall into that category. And basically, with this tax relief fund, districts with the highest tax rates but who are farthest from adequacy are first in line for a property tax reduction. And there's more details about that formula. If you guys have questions about how that's functioning in depth, we can go into that, but that's just at the high level how that's going to work.
Great. Are there any questions about this page?
All right, so from Denise, we have a question. Is there a consistent percentage that is being reached with the additional funding for schools that were below the 50% mark? For example, one school gets $345 while another gets $457 per pupil. Are they both reaching the same percent of adequacy?
Relatively close. It's not a precise, but what we will see over time is essentially the floor in the state essentially established. Right now, we have a pretty big slope, obviously, at those districts that are the least funded. What will happen is that there'll be a floor, and that floor will slowly rise over time.
Thanks, Ben. And then we have a quick question from Sanford, thanks. What does it mean to be a unit school district?
To be a unit school district means you have both elementary schools and high schools within your school district. We also have in the state some elementary school districts that only have elementary schools and high school districts that only have high schools in them. So if you're a unit district, you have the whole pipeline of K-12.
So the only thing I'll add on the property tax side is last year, even though these provisions went in, there wasn't money put into the property tax relief fund. I think what's being discussed this session is that if $350 million additional dollars is put into the formula, 50 of that would go into the property tax relief fund for this year. That's why we're asking for $400 million, so that way we see an additional $350 million go into the formula, because 50 automatically goes to property tax relief. And we will stay tuned to Advance Illinois, since we will have more on the how the property tax relief fund is working and a little bit on the ins and outs of that as the legislative session winds down.
Thanks, Teresa. And we have one last question. Thanks again, Sanford. Is there a cap on how much a district can tax itself?
In Illinois, there are multiple funds that districts can tax into. So there's a operations and maintenance fund, education fund, and each of those individual funds have caps. And so there is a limit, but it's not it's reasonably high. In addition, the districts have, many districts are under a PTEL tax cap, which means that in any given year they cannot raise the amount that they levy, which is the dollar amount that they're actually asking from taxpayers. They can't raise that more than the rate of inflation.
Okay, great. That concludes this part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa to talk through some next steps.
Thanks, Alex. So we want to encourage you to play around with the dashboard and look up your district or like districts. And if you have questions for us about how something is working, or want to know how to get a particular piece of data, or why we did something one way or another, please do reach out and send them to us. We do think of this as a really cool way to see what's happening at the state level, but also a way to really, like we said, monitor that the formula is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and also as a way to bridge to advocacy with our legislators across the state that we need continued investment. So I'll just quickly thank everyone on Funding Illinois Future and the Fix the Formula campaign that got us so far, and all of our partners here who continue to work to get additional dollars. And then the next thing that we have is just, if you're feeling really passionate about school funding, which I think you are because you're on our webinar today, and you are either on your phone or on your computer and can take a screenshot, this is one of the asks for our advocacy. Look up your district, zoom in on the district lookup page to the gap to adequacy that you see for your district. Take that shot, use that photo, and tag your legislator. We have a link to all of the legislators' Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts on our Funding Illinois Future website, and just say, look, we fixed the formula, now we have to fund our schools. We need $400 million more into the formula this year. You can use this text here, you can create your own text, you can thank the legislator for having invested in us in years past, especially if you were one of our advocates who was really civically engaged, talking to your legislator all last year. It's a nice way to thank them and say, look, we did a great job. The money has gone into our district, as you can see by this little orange bar, but we still have some work to do. So that's our ask for those of you who are on and can take an action statement. If there are other ways that you want to use this dashboard and visualize what's happening in the formula and putting on social media, just use that hashtag #FixedItNowFundIt, and we will track it and retweet it and post it and share it with your legislator as well. So that's what we have. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in. If you want us to pull up your district, we can do that too. Yeah, we're happy to stay on for the next 7 minutes or so.
So we do have one additional question. Thank you, Michelle. She asks, how often is the data updated or refreshed? Is it real-time data?
Hi, Michelle. So this data is based on the most recent model that ISB produced. And so we will be updating it every time new data is publicly available from ISB.
And so what that would mean, for example, is if after we have, hopefully, in 2 weeks we have a state budget and we have a clear delineation of how much money is going into this funding formula, that ISB will process it and then release a spreadsheet that shows exactly where the money is going. We will take that Excel spreadsheet and Alex will update the equity dashboard to reflect that new information as it comes out of the General Assembly, then ISB.
All right. As Teresa said, we'll keep the question box open for those of you who are hanging on, and as you submit them, we'll read them out. I want to say thanks to all the folks who've given us positive feedback. We really appreciate it. Lisa says, thank you. This is exactly what we need as a state, and it pertains to equity and transparency. And those are exactly our goals. That is exactly what we're going for. We want it to be clear and simple and easy to figure out how the formula is working and where the money's going and what needs to happen next. So thank you all.
Yeah, we'll just chat for another 5 minutes. But this is, as we talked last year, what happens over time with the formula is you get advocacy happening here and there, things tweak and change. And so this really is a way to just kind of monitor that the formula is doing what it should be doing over time. So any way that we want it to be useful for you in telling a compelling story locally or advocating to your legislator. So if there's more that we can do, let us know.
Great, and we got a question about the last page that I would like to address. Okay, so we got a question about the changing property tax rate for the state. So this property tax rate changes based on your district type. So if I switch this to a school district that was, for example, a high school district, Argo is a high school district. Where did it go? Okay. So for example, Argo is a community high school district. This number will change to 2.7% because it's comparing it to other school districts that are also high school districts. If I pick an elementary school district like Oak Park Elementary School District, that number will change to 3.7% because elementary school districts have a different state average than unit school districts or high school districts. So this property tax rate, the state average, will change based on the district type you select.
That was an excellent question, Ira. Thank you so
you
much for bringing that to people's attention.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thanks for joining. Feel free to email or call us offline if things come up for you, but we just appreciate so much your time with us today and that you're excited and using this dashboard. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.